Justin Case Mosley on the harp, really appreciating that music. My name is Brent Adams. I'm a current host of Voices in the Village. Super excited today to be sitting here with Captain Laubach of the Salvation Army and also Timothy Petty, who's a resident, a participant of the winter shelter. Today we'll be talking a little bit about local homelessness in Santa Cruz, also some of the solutions that have been out there recently, and maybe some of the future plans. But we really want to talk about a storage program that people have been using. And I have to, full disclosure, I am the Brent Adams, the director of Warming Center, and I operate the storage program, but I'm not really going to be talking about that myself. But one of the guests is actually a participant of the storage program. Really grateful to have Captain Laubach here. He's been in the community for a few years now. And he's really, I've seen a revolution of Salvation Army's relationship to homelessness locally. And also a lot going on in Watsonville with day services, Salvation Army, also with the city-county contract for the winter shelter in 1220 River Street. And there's a shuttle program also that's going on. First of all, I'm really curious, just on a personal note, how did you get into captaining?
Oh my. 15 years ago I met my wife, or 18 years ago I met my wife, and we decided to go into ministry with the Salvation Army. And it just so happens that the Salvation Army is one of those unique organizations that, while our motivation is ministry, we do many social services. And whether that be disaster work, around the world, or passing out food boxes, and it just so happens here in the United States we operate many shelters and day centers and senior living centers and daycares for children, and whatever the community needs, that's what the Army allows us to do. Yeah. So we have the autonomy to do that. So when we arrived here 4 years ago, we get transferred around every so many years. And when we arrived here, the very first thing we noticed was the huge need for homeless shelter and homeless-based programs here in our community. And there was a gap. We just noticed that there was a gap, and we decided we could fill that gap if possible with the buildings and the resources that we had. So it was sort of like a natural fit, I guess.
Yeah. I also have a question, not to disparage the former captain or management team, but why do you think they weren't more engaged?
That's a good question. I wish I could answer that question in every community that the Salvation Army is in. And to be honest, I don't always know. Some, just like every minister of every different kind of denomination, some feel led to do certain ministries, led to do certain services. Some are more skilled and gifted in music, so that's what they tend to do. It just so happens that my wife and I had previous experience with operating shelters in Colorado and in Utah. So when we got here, that was some of the experience that we drew on, and it just happened to be a natural fit. When we arrived, and as I said, there was this gap, and we had buildings that we could utilize, and yeah, I try not to guess what happened before. All I know is we try to do the best we can with what we have.
Yeah, and it's been truly beneficial. Let me kind of walk us through the years really quickly. There had been a winter shelter contract over the many years, I think contracted with Homeless Services Center.
Correct.
Operating at the National Guard Armory.
Yes. Up
in De La Viega Park. Mm-hmm. And that finally, I guess the contract ended for one reason or another. We don't have to get into that. And then Association of Faith Communities, in teaming with you, began operating it. Why don't you tell us quickly how that went?
Well, so about 4 years ago, the Armory, that contract ended, and all of a sudden, when the next winter rolled around, AFC, the Associated Faith Communities, I heard about them, and I actually stopped, and I saw their trailer parked outside of St. Stephen's down in Aptos, and I just pulled in, and I said, "What are you doing? What do you do?" I saw they're unloading bed mats, and they explained to me real quick about this shelter program they had that travels around to different churches, and they told me about the requirements for it and how much they do casework with it. And at the time, Debbie Bates was the director, yeah, and so the more I talked about it, I'm like, that's something that we want to be associated with. I said, so why don't you just come use our building? And they really, I said, yeah. I said, they're always looking for buildings and different churches and organizations to be a part of it. And I said, yeah, our building sits empty every single night. Why not? Let's just do it. So that's where we started. We started with that, with one night per month. And then within the first 6 months, we went to 2 nights per month. And then all of a sudden, the county and the cities basically stepped forward and said that they were looking for an agency that was willing to operate a winter shelter every night for the 5-month period. And, we went and talked to our board and our congregation members, and sure enough, that became a possibility, and we just, we grew from there.
Yeah. And to get to the current, I think that was 2 years ago? 3 years ago.
3 years ago.
And then you had the contract with them again last year.
Correct.
Expanding to 2 locations.
Correct.
Finally, the Salvation Army and the
VFW. Sure, yeah.
Always also, let me shoehorn the warming center in there.
Right.
For extreme nights, backup.
Yeah.
And then over the last year, there's been encampments. First in San Lorenzo Park, and then this one at Ross. And the city has developed this program to pick up the slack and in a new way, a really, really audacious way, give the city a lot of credit for doing something new like this. 1220 River Street. Now, last year, I think it was under contract with who?
The city. No, the city operated
right,
last year. Yeah.
And then this year?
The Salvation Army operates it this year.
Okay. And big open question, how's it going?
So far, it's going amazingly well. Not saying that there's not snags here and there, but generally speaking, we have an amazing staff, many of which were actually worked there last year with the city as a city employee, so they already had experience with the property. And so other than some programming changes and more services and things like that we offer, we have some of the same staff members and the same property. And so far it's going really, really well.
Okay. It's very contentious. The Ross encampment behind Gateway Plaza had somewhere between 100 and 1,000 people there. I'm being facetious, but something like that, it seemed.
Yeah.
And it was very controversial. The city was sued. They were in courts in 2 different cities. Very dramatic.
Yes.
And the community was demanding something. We talked about transitional encampments. We talked about all kinds of different things, and the city ended up settling with this. And we're in how many months now?
The contract for the River Street, let me see, runs until the end of June. So I guess 2-3 months, assuming that it doesn't get extended. And I do know that the county is in talks currently about extending River Street encampment as well. So it looks like there's a good possibility that it could go longer.
What did you just say? That
there was a good possibility, but not a guarantee, that it may be able to go longer than June.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Let's call my bookie. All right. So this show today is called Storage to Shelter.
Yes.
And we have Timothy Petty here, who has been in the community for, I think, a few years now, maybe? How long have you been?
No, I'm newer than that to the area.
Okay.
It's been about a month and a half this last visit, and then last fall I was for another month and some.
And I'm very familiar with Tim because I operate this day and night storage program. It's a program of the Warming Center program. And that really was established to meet an unmet need. And you've been a regular, what we call it, a client, a regular user of the storage program. And then you also are accessing the shuttle and going to the winter shelter. Quickly, so we have some video we want to roll in at first, so I'll get back to you. If you don't mind, we're going to show the very first video. It's a person named Jane. If we can see that video, is that something we can do now just on the cuff? Jan, we're at the Day and Night Storage Program. I'm wondering how you feel about the storage program.
I think it's really wonderful. It makes it possible for me to keep things that are important to me. And I am an older person, so I can't physically carry everything, although I try. This makes a real difference, and I'm very thankful for it. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. So we'll just go to the next one. Hi, Aaron. We're in the Day and Night Storage Program. I was just wondering what your thoughts are on the storage program so far.
Well, I feel like it's one of the most beneficial programs in the city for a homeless person. It helps drastically with the stigma of homelessness, not having to walk around with your equipment. Not only does it make it to where you have access to be able to go into stores, go in to apply for jobs, but also just to not feel like you're a lesser class of person as you go through the city. I feel like the stress of being homeless is one of the things that a lot of people may not understand, and it makes it a lot easier knowing that your stuff is safe and not feeling like you are burdened with it, you know. And so I can't imagine how we pulled off each day prior to being able to have this program to keep our stuff at.
That's great. How long have you been working with the program?
About 8 months now.
Yeah. Okay. Any other things? Any other benefits coming in here?
Totally. I feel like
any other services that we're providing?
yeah. I mean, like I've gotten socks when I have none. I've gotten blankets when I've been cold. You know, like plus I've been able to get advice. Like I have had more info about other programs here than I've had on Emmeline. You know, and so one thing's for sure is that we're very grateful.
Thank you. So that were our friends Jan and Aaron who use the storage program. And Tim, I'm really curious, without prompting, what's your experience of the storage program? We call it day and night storage program. You come, it's open between 8 and 10 in the morning and 5 to 7 at night. What's it like for you?
It's amazingly helpful. I like to eat more variety of food than I could possibly carry. Unless I'm going to buy just small amounts of something and small amounts of something from the bulk section, it's very difficult for me to carry the variety of foods. I think keeps me healthy. And then, yeah, clothing-wise, if I were to carry all my clothing with me, it would be very sore, and most of my energy would go toward hauling my stuff around. So I agree with the comment that it's one of the most helpful things and is often lacking in different towns. I don't have my tools with me this time, but often it's really helpful to have tools stored safely. Yeah, and it's nice to come in and have some routine, a friendly routine of the day. But it's immensely helpful. I appreciate it.
Then we notice you're waiting there for the shuttle, which comes at 6. So we open at 5 p.m. and the shuttle that's going to the VFW and or the Salvation Army, and several people do that. In fact, in one of the videos, we were able to see in the background some racks where people can, because I believe with these shelters, people can't really take too much more than they can put on their. We were taking bike trailers. You typically carry a fairly large backpack with you, but what's your experience once you leave our facility?
Well, almost every day I've been going to the storage and then also to the VFW. So the last month and a half I've got to receive the benefit of both of those programs. The VFW is really well organized, and they have the kindest staff as far as I've ever seen when it comes to conflict resolution, and the best training. I'm assuming they either are just rock stars at that on their own, or they must have really good training, because that stood out to me. There's always going to be some kind of little arguments when you have people who are sharing space. Mm-hmm. And I really feel safe and treated with respect there. Yeah, it's also nice having to wake up a little earlier than I would normally wake up to enjoy the morning, and yeah, it's been good for me.
So I'm interested in that conduit between the two. It was a little, to my mind, haphazard. We were talking about how to come to the rescue at the beginning of the season. It looked like there might have been a deficit in shelter, and then all of a sudden there's going to be, the city came through and more shelter were opened up. In the meantime, we were contacted by the county, I believe. Would we be able to have a shuttle out in front of our business? Our business, the storage program already is a little controversial to be in a office park in a neighborhood across the street, but then the added value, but also complication of having people lining up for a shuttle on that street. Let's identify the street. It's Felker Street, which became famous for the footbridge right over to the homeless encampment. So that little cul-de-sac had a lot going on. So then having people line up there, but it seems to have worked. There might have been some complaint from the community, but I think it. I think you had some managerial things, maybe not having people pick.
Well,
you want to talk to that?
Yeah, so I think the first reason that it worked out well was, whether you want to admit it or not, was your involvement with the community and the agreement that you made ahead of time to go out and police the neighborhood, and I was there. I was there to see you go do that, and to that your office monitored the things that you found and cleaned up in the neighborhood. Where if the storage program would not have been there, whatever you found would have been laying there forever, right? And that wouldn't have gotten picked up. But I think that even ballooned more because from our end, then I was able to visit your program and see what you do and things like that. And I don't know how much you know, but when we opened our day center program in Watsonville, and we quickly realized that we needed a storage aspect to it as well. So basically, we just drew upon my experience inside of your office, and so we added some storage sheds behind our building and storage containers and things like that. So we just made a mini storage program down in Watsonville based off what your office does.
That's right.
And I don't know if you realize that or not, but you gave us the idea, and we just modeled it after that. And it's not as quite as a grand scope, but for the 40 or 50 people that we have in the Watsonville shelter every single night, it works out really, really well. And so it's something that they utilize every single day.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Let's go back to Tim. So there is the the 2012 encampment. There had been the Ross encampment. You've kind of, to my mind, staked out your own relationship with Santa Cruz Homeless. You've experimented. You've been to the Homeless Garden Project, the downtown. You work with the Downtown Streets team. You work with our program, the VFW. Really getting and maybe many more than that. But I'm curious, why do you choose not to go into the encampments rather than and choose the shelters instead?
Well, I do like living in a tent, I won't lie, but because the space isn't unlimited, I feel it would be somewhat selfish of me because I believe I have more options than many of the individuals, and I'm sure I try not to think too much about local seniority, but I certainly am pretty new to the town. I feel like unless I knew there was just endless spaces, I wouldn't want to live in that specific environment because I just don't feel overly deserving of that unless space is unlimited.
That is really unique. I mean, I want to give you a lot of credit for that because some of the things that we do worry about is having awesome services as magnets and people come from out of the area. You're here for a little while, and but I think you're definitely a benefit to the community. But giving up a tent space, which you would prefer for a shelter, that's really amazing to hear. So I want to honor you for that.
Thanks.
Also, so let's see. I think we have a few minutes left. I want to kind of let the cat out of the bag. I've heard the bad news that we might be losing the captain from Santa Cruz to another community. I think you've been hugely beneficial to this community, and many people agree.
Thank you.
You've really filled in the blanks. You have filled in that void, and you've been a friend to me. We had a lot of conversations over the last few years. It really helped us out. What's going on?
Well, first, so the rumors are true. The Salvation Army has a system in which leadership gets transferred around the state, around the country, around the world, and it happened to be our time. So my wife and I were recently notified that we would be transferred to the city of Modesto. It just so happens is currently dealing with a homeless crisis very similar to what Santa Cruz is dealing with. And they just have entered into contracts with the county there to do very similar to what we're doing here with our shelter system here. So, except in a larger scale. So they've more than doubled their shelter capacity this year, and it just so happens that the officers there were being transferred as well. So they notified us that we would be moving to Modesto here in about by the end of June. And taking over the shelter operations there, the youth center operations, and things like that. The good news is, and like I said, whether it's good news or bad news that we're leaving, we'll leave that up to everybody else. But the good news is, we've tried to set up a system that that all of our shelter programs can continue whether we're here or not. So we don't believe, just like you mentioned earlier about the previous leader, we don't believe that the program should ride on whether or not the leader likes it or not. So what we've done was we've set up contracts and conversations with the city and the county that these things can continue year after year. At the same time, we've already been in conversation with the new leader that's on their way here at the end of June, and informed them about the partnerships that we have with the city and the different agencies and AFC and the county, and basically we got them on board right away ahead of time. And so they said, just go ahead and enter into contracts that we feel would be beneficial to the homeless community, and that they would just pick up, where we left off, and they would just continue with all those same shelter programs and things like that. So we were happy to hear that the leaders that were coming, they have some shelter experience already. A couple of years back, they operated shelters for the Salvation Army in Oakland. So they have some experience. They are like-minded. So I think the community is going to be very happy with our replacements as well.
That's great. Also, I have something to announce. We are, the Warming Center storage program is doing a laundry program. It's called Laundry Wednesdays. We're going to do laundry for, again, scalable. And we might be able to do the laundry for the 1220 River Street program. That's a commitment that we have. Thank you for being on here, Tim and Captain. I'm Brent for the Voices in the Village. Thank you very much for watching.